Hey guys, this is Luke from What's the Point Anyway, and thanks for tuning into today's podcast. My guest is a friend of mine from the last couple of years, Chris Deguido. He's a guy he and I sort of hash it out over a lot of things back and forth. So it was good to bring him on and do that in verbal form. We do talk a lot about theology and different perspectives and how we're reading the Bible and things we're trying to work out and things we think we have worked out. I hope you enjoy it. For those that do enjoy it, please, just a reminder, anything you can do to help support the show really helps. Like, share, subscribe, do all the things that help punch it up the algorithm, because I'm not spending any money on ads or anything like that. So the more you can do that, the more it helps me to bring on more interesting guests. Thanks and enjoy the show.
If you had a good mic, use that. But if this is all you got, it's fine.
Man, you know what's a shame is I have like a killer mic setup because I used to actually do a lot of audio production stuff.
Yeah, I was watching.
I haven't done it so much so lately that it's like kind of packed away.
That's what kids will do, hey?
So it's like I have it, but it's all just packed away.
No, that's fine. No, we'll just go with this. This is fine. Well, thanks.
Oh, sorry. In your post-production, do you have any kind of like software that kind of helps with the echo and all that?
Yeah, Riverside does it. So like, I'm pretty. I'm not like super tech savvy with any of this stuff. So it's made for people like me. Basically, when I finish an episode, I just hit like AI producer, and it tightens up the sound, gets rid of the pauses, so it works fine.
Okay.
So
well, if you're good to go, then I am good to go.
Perfect. How was bedtime?
It was good.
Yeah.
We tried to have him in by 7.
Yeah.
And so, it's not always perfect, but it's good. Is it okay if I have like my coffee?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes when I talk a lot, it's like I gotta have some.
No, that's totally fine. I got a glass of water here, but I've got like 2 drips in it, so I'll just have to go dry.
So I guess with this, I'm officially like not a non, as the kids say.
Well, it depends. Right? I've got you on video, but we can always produce audio only. I'll call you Chris.
I don't mind both.
I'll let you disclose your full identity if you wish.
I don't mind video. I'm not really scared of anybody.
Yeah, I used to have on X. I used to do my account as like anonymous, and then I came to the conclusion, I'm like, anyone that's actually interested in tracking me isn't gonna get caught up by a anonymous X account. If they want to find me, they'll find me. Like, so much of my information. I mean, we just live online now. Like, our information's out. I'm not sure who we can actually really hide from anymore.
I just didn't like this whole thing that happened like within the last few weeks where like people were like bullying other Christians, like, you're a non, like you should like tell us who you are, coward. And it's like,
yeah, agreed.
Well,
thanks for coming on. How'd you go? I saw you put up the tweet a couple of weeks ago asking for help on the question, what's the point anyway? Where did you land?
So I actually did think about it for this entire time. And I guess my answer in general would be like, the point of it anyway, or the point of our life it boils down to John 17, which is to know the one true God and Jesus Christ whom you've sent. And everything within that simple phrase kind of expands from there.
Yeah.
We start diving into the kingdom of God, what it means to go from death to life, the proper worship of God. So I would say the larger scope, the point of our lives is to know God in the truest sense, and to worship him and to give him glory. And then from that, we are to love our fellow man and expand his kingdom through that love, through the peace of the gospel.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good answer. For me, it boils down, and I mean, I'm in a position where I only became Christian sort of in my early 30s. So most of my adult life, I've been non-Christian, therefore had a worldview that's, very opposed to what it is now. But the thing that I like about it is it is so black and white and objective. So like if the Gospels are what they claim to be, then that more or less has to be the answer. The Gospels can't claim to be what they are, and then the point is just to go about whatever you want to do, and everyone's truth is their own truth. Like, it's so black and white with what it's saying, and therefore, if it is the truth, then that's what the point is. That's what for us to fight, and it's for us to then live in accordance with that, because then we'll get the most out of life as it's sort of been designed for us. Were you always Christian? Did you grow up Christian?
I grew up in a Christian family.
Yeah.
So my dad converted to Christianity, like, I want to say a year before I was born.
Yeah.
And then my mom followed shortly after he did. And so I was born in a Christian household. And for a moment, I was attending a Catholic church,
Yeah.
actually, in Georgia. And I
As
don't remember
a kid or
exactly
as an adult?
as a kid. And it's funny because as a kid, you don't really think about denominations and things like that. I just remember, like, this is church, this is what we do. And so I don't know when we made the switch to being Protestant. Like, I remember being like 5 or 6 and going to, Catholic church. But my dad was also a pastor. And
Right.
so
Okay.
he was doing his own ministries too, like
Yeah.
in the convalescent homes, nursing homes, and even prison ministries. So I grew up in that environment of the convalescent nursing home, never did anything with prisons.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was my whole life.
So you're a pastor's kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was that experience like? Because I know, like, that can go two ways for a lot of kids. Like, a lot of kids that grow up with pastor dads end up not wanting anything to do with the faith.
Yeah. So I've seen like testimonies, or I've even known people where it's like I was a pastor's kid and it was so strict and fundamental, and it kind of strangles whatever faith they had out of them because of all the
The
restrictions.
rules. Yeah.
Yeah. For me personally, like, my parents were very much like, this is the Christian faith. Like, we lived our lives according to the Christian faith.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, you are going to church.
Yeah.
But it was never kind of like, you know, I can't even think of a good example, like a nun slapping you with a ruler type
Yeah.
household. Like, we were still like pretty normal, like we would have movie nights. We'd even
Yeah.
watch scary movies.
Yeah.
I had a normal childhood. I played video games, but I was always in church.
Yeah.
And just like my whole life in a more moralistic view too was totally shaped by my upbringing, which is a blessing.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like you had like the positive pastor's kid experience as opposed to the others.
Yeah, I mean, my dad, I was always a daddy's boy, so like him being a pastor, I always looked up to him.
Yeah.
And my mom did a fantastic job. Like, she was more the traditional housewife. She did work like in her past life, and even when I got older, she took on some work. But my mom was always the traditional kind of stay at home, and she did a good job at maintaining the Christian values and things like that. I had a healthy kind of fear for my parents, nothing too irrational or unhealthy in that realm, which was, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was definitely blessed. I know there's some like bad testimonies about that.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate.
What then, like, what did your early adulthood look like? As because I think, it sounds like you weren't like totally shielded, which I think that tends to be the thing that happens that sends kids from families where the dad's a pastor off the other way, when like they're shielded from everything, and then all of a sudden they hit 15, 16, 17, 18, and they can't shield them anymore, and they see the world and they want to. What was it like for you, like growing up and hitting 18 and starting to become an adult out of that environment?
Well, when I was 18, I actually didn't know what I wanted to do after I was graduating high school, and so I joined the United States Marine Corps. Went to the military, and so you're really on your own at that point. It's like now you start practicing what you've been taught, and you start upholding the values that should have been instilled in you.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot. I got to tell you, man. in the military, you get around a lot of rowdy guys, and it's like you're finally an adult on your own.
Yeah.
You do stupid stuff. There's a lot of times where, I did stupid stuff, sinful things.
Yeah.
And and there's some things where it's like I reflect back now and it's like, man, you kind of regret. It's kind of like a sobering reflection.
Yeah.
But you also get to see how far you've kind of come,
Mm.
which is also the blessing. And so I was around a lot of bad influences in the military. A lot of drinking. Mom, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry. But yeah, a lot of drinking and just dumb decisions, that I'm not proud of.
How long are you in the Marines
Nothing.
for?
I did 4 years, one enlistment. So I got stationed on California, um, and that's where I'm at now. And I've
Yeah.
been here since 2013. No, I'm sorry, 2012. I came
Yeah.
to California.
Why'd you leave the military and what did you do after that?
So halfway kind of through my contract, I kind of started thinking like, I don't want to retire. This isn't really for me.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to give it a chance. It was me buying 4 extra years.
Yeah.
And so I started reflecting, and like music has always been a big part of my life. I was always playing guitar. I had my own like garage band. And so I was like, oh, maybe I want to be a musician. And then, upon reflection, I was like, I want to do the techie side. I don't think I'm cut out to be some rock and roll star. So I want to learn the techie stuff. And so when I got out, I used my GI Bill. I went to school for like audio production and video production, which is ironic considering this, like not using a proper microphone.
Kids
And
happen,
so
hey?
I did that. Yeah. And I went to school for 3 years, got my bachelor's degree, and then I got a job doing live events. So I set up shows, I tore shows down. At a certain point, I was operating shows, but more in a corporate sense, not really in a music sense. So it's more professional conferences, kind of like when you see like a Christian conference,
Yeah.
and it's like, I don't know, whatever Christian conference you can think of.
Yeah.
So I was operating those shows,
Yeah.
and then COVID came and took out that industry for a little while.
Yeah.
People didn't know what was going on. Like they kind of did this Zoom thing where all the live shows were on Zoom, and
Yeah.
I didn't want to do that. So I found another job to pay the bills during the pandemic, and ended up being a satellite technician.
Right.
So that's totally out of left field. I
Yeah.
had to really learn like from the ground up, like what am I doing? And that led to other things. I stayed there for about a year and then didn't like it, didn't like the work environment, didn't like the scheduling. It was very underpaid, but it paid the bills.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then I got a job through my friend who has his own trucking company. I was at my brother's house during New Year's Eve, and he was talking about one of his clients. He's like, "Hey, they're looking for somebody, and they're great people." And my wife was super excited. She's like, "Hey, what do they do?" Because she didn't like me working there. It
Yeah.
was exhausting. We barely had time together. She's like, "Oh, so what do they do?" "Oh, they're in the tile industry." And I was like, "Man, I don't know anything about tile. Like, technology's been my life for
Mm.
a long time at this point." And so, but I got the number of one of the owners and met him, and I've been at the showroom. So designers come there and they design like houses or commercial projects, and so like it's a showroom, it's a gallery
Yeah.
showroom, and so I manage that, and I've been there for like 3 years.
Yeah.
Years of it.
Awesome.
It's awesome.
And so whereabouts are you? San Diego?
Yeah, San Diego.
Yeah. Interesting. So what's been your I'm interested now, like, to dig in a little bit to like your faith as a kid who grew up as a pastor's kid and then became adult off military and so forth, and then here you are now. Like, have you gone through periods where you questioned what you believed and started to doubt your faith, or has that always sort of just been a constant for you?
No, I've definitely had some battles,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's because partly I grew up in a more reformed Christian house. So that whole idea of like predestination, election, the Calvinism thing, which I held to for a long time. And I say held to, I don't know where I land
Yeah.
on Calvinism considering other things
Yeah.
that we'll probably talk about. But I struggled a lot because I was always like in these seasons where I felt super spiritual,
Mm-hmm.
just reading my Bible, I was praying, and then, I would do something, I would sin or fall into some sin. And it's like, kind of like, man, this is it. Like, I don't think I'm saved.
Mm-hmm.
What if I'm not the elect and things like that? And so I struggled with that for a long time. And
Yeah.
honestly, I don't know where in my life I just kind of put that to bed. Where now it's just kind of like, you know, I live my life as best as I can, loving God, loving others, do good to others, because that's the message that I see consistently in the Old and New Testament.
Yeah.
And I think, growing up, I've made it really complicated.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people in church make things complicated.
Mm-hmm. And where have you landed now in terms of like churching? Do you go to church? You ended up sort of,
But yeah,
yeah.
I love church. Yeah, I still go. It's ironic because I go to so California is very different. It's, hippie land and
Yeah. It's
the
more
whole
like where
Jesus. I
I'm
don't know if
from.
you're familiar. Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't know if you're familiar with the Jesus movement that was like in the 60s, 70s,
Is that the
or
Jesus
anything like that.
Revolution? They made a movie about it recently. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't seen the movie, but I know enough about it. So
Yeah.
like
So a lot of these, like,
hippie Jesus
a
movement.
lot of like, yeah, I would say like a lot of the modern, like, Christianity that you see today kind of came out of that,
Mm-hmm.
the modern music
Yeah.
and the whole kind of charismatic kind of, the spirit is upon me type teaching.
Yeah.
So a lot of churches in California tend to be more charismatic.
Yeah.
And they tend to be more dispensational. They tend to be more, premillennial. And so where I'm at in my faith now, which is funny, I'm kind of like the odd man out, although no one really knows because it's not like I'm bum rushing the stage and
Yeah.
shouting my beliefs. I submit to my pastor,
Mm-hmm.
and but as like a preterist going to a dispensational church,
Right. So it's a dispy church.
it is.
Yeah.
But I've learned to kind of be at peace with that, which is kind of seems counter like to what I post sometimes,
Yeah.
but I'm also trying to be more gracious towards people.
Yeah.
And it's just where I'm at right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a dispensational church, but like I love the leadership. They're still Christians. I don't agree with their eschatology. That has an effect on I think we have differing worldviews because of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like they're not teaching eschatology every Sunday.
Yeah.
So like the day-to-day sermon, like I can still grow from that. And
Mm-hmm.
I've never met a pastor I've fully agreed with.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So
don't think they exist.
yeah. And I also want I want my family to be satisfied. I'm not gonna rip, my wife and my son out of a church just because I disagree with them eschatologically.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I want my son to grow up the way that I did, where the parents instilled the values, the parents taught the kid.
Mm-hmm.
And then the church just kind of helps build on that, you know? And because there's been times, even though my dad was a pastor, there's been times we visited other churches.
Yeah.
But I got most of my teaching and what I know from my dad.
Is it so? What's a like? What does a Californian dispy church look like? Like you go on a Sunday. Like how many people are there? How does the service run?
It depends. It's not a hyper charismatic church.
Yeah.
They do believe that the gifts still like operate, but they're not like the NAR,
Yeah.
hyper charismatics. It's just kind of like it's one. I actually appreciate this about them because they're not going around and like blowing on people like Benny Hinn style, or throwing oil on people. But like if the pastor feels like he wants to pray for somebody and ask God for a healing, I'm not opposed to that.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I think we should do that because I think God can still heal people, but it's just, it's not like anyone there, I think, has a gift of healing, you
Yeah.
know. But
Yeah.
we're praying on behalf of somebody. That's a widely different thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it a bit
So,
like,
like,
yeah, keep going.
sorry. So, I guess to answer your question, like, what it's like is it's got a couple hundred people per service, I would say. It's not a small church, and it's very structured as you would expect.
Hmm.
It's 3 worship songs, tithes and offering, additional worship song, and then announcements, pastor, last song. That's it. It's very formulaic in
Yeah.
that sense.
And like, what is like the prevailing worldview in an environment like that? Like, what sort of stuff's the pastor teaching, and how are they applying this worldview to their lives?
Well, I would say they aren't doom and gloom.
Yep.
But I won't say that.
Yeah.
They are dispensational pre-trib church. I know that for a fact.
Yeah.
I've been there long enough.
Yeah.
But they also don't say, like one day, like don't do anything because we'll be raptured out, that
Yeah. Yeah.
type of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
They very much realize that the kingdom of God is something that is realized now to a degree. And that's the difference.
Yeah.
I think it's fully realized here in the sense that it is here.
Yeah.
It's not a degree. But since they believe that it's here to a degree, their worldview was still to go out and, heal the nations, preach the gospel. So I do appreciate that about them. They're very mission driven. There's a
Hmm.
couple what's the word I'm looking for? I guess charities
Yeah.
that they do. Man, they're building houses in Mexico, which is cool. They do a lot, and that's where I step back and I go, okay, look, I don't agree with them on X, Y, and Z, but they're doing a lot for other people,
Yeah.
and I can tell that they're genuine, you know, and they're not making money off of their eschatology,
Hmm.
you know.
Selling books
And
about
that's
the
when
the
it's
final 7 years.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's where I kind of draw the line. Is like it's fine to have that view. I think you can be a Christian and be a dispensational person
Yeah.
because I was,
Yeah.
and people in my family are.
Yeah. Is that your
So I try to be.
is that still your dad's position?
My dad he's actually surprised me because for a while I think he's always been dispensational. And I think he would still say he is, but sometimes we talk all the time and he sent me texts like, "Hey, are you dispensationalist or are you a covenant theology guy?" And he knows my position. He knows I'm a preterist and he's never ragged me for it or anything like that. He actually enjoys the conversation.
Yeah.
And my brother, he was a dispensationalist for a long time, and I don't know where he stands more so right now. He's kind of revealed some things here and there where it's kind of like I feel like he's coming out of it. But yeah, I mean, there's people in my family that held that view.
Yeah.
I've held that view all the way up until 2020.
Yeah. So how did that change for you? And because I mean, when I first got to know you, which is maybe a year ago.
Almost 2 years. It's almost two
Yeah.
years ago, actually.
Was it? Yeah. And
Yeah,
it seemed, I remember one of your first comments. I don't think you were quite full preterist at that point, where you still had a few things as yet future. So
I
how
was.
what's been the steps to get there?
When I joined Twitter, I was just started being like more in the post millennial
Hmm.
camp. But there was still like dispensational things that I had inside of me. So like when Hamas attacked Israel, I was very much like, yeah, let's go Israel.
Right. So
And
that's only a year and a bit ago.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Not a full 2 years.
Yeah.
And so there was like some like, and just to clarify for your audience, I'm not anti-Israel.
Yeah.
I'm just not pro-Israel in the way that fundamental Christians say we should be.
Yeah.
And I think that's a clarity. I think Israel as a nation, like Benjamin Netanyahu does have a duty to protect his citizens. You don't let other people, do what happened. And so I support them in that sense. I think with any country, it doesn't matter if you're Israel,
Yeah,
Russia, Ukraine. I don't.
they're just another
But
country.
as a, yeah, you have
Yeah,
to do what you got to do.
yeah,
But when I joined Twitter, I had some still dispensational things inside of me, but I was largely post millennial.
hmm
Uh, but my journey out of dispensationalism happened because of COVID.
yeah. The big end times event sent you the other way.
Man, I got to be honest with you. I was one of those guys that was looking for anything. I was so enamored with like, this might be it.
hmm
Because every time you turn around, it's kind of like you see the death clock ticking up. And it's like, oh man, mandatory vaccines,
Mm,
man, vaccine passports. Like, this is kind of eerie.
yeah,
And so dude, I got to be honest. I was that guy. I was like looking for blood moons,
yeah, yeah.
and I was like
So was I.
watching
So
YouTube
was I. So
videos.
when
Yeah,
I first I basically came to Christianity as an end time futurist. That was what and I think if my faith was built on that, I think it would be a very, very rocky faith today and would probably disappear. But yeah, I
it
get you.
does a lot. It does a lot of damage.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't realize it because they're like, "Oh, no, it doesn't do a lot." Like, what are you talking about? It does.
Yeah,
Because I've personally experienced it
same here.
where I've seen people that I know who didn't want to have kids because, like, what's the point? Like, we're in the end times. Jesus said, woe to nursing mothers. Like, why should I have kids?
Yeah,
And it's like, now we're here 5 years later,
yeah,
right? And it does damage psychologically like that.
yeah.
You know,
I think the answer. I can't. I've reached out to heaps of them and none want to come on. But I really want to get like a hardcore dispy to come on this show and talk through what's the point anyway. Because for them, the point is basically just to batten down the hatches and wait for the end. Yeah, there is no point in the here and now.
yeah, and it's almost weird because it's this mixture of like, there's nothing we can do about it,
Mm,
but then they're selling like products, like apocalypse food,
yeah.
store up on ammo, and it's like, why?
Why
If
would you
you
store
actually
ammo?
think,
100%. Yeah,
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 like, why are you teaching this
yeah,
if like we're just gonna fly away to Jesus?
yeah.
And so I was like, yeah, I was really into it. I was like looking at the patents for, I was looking at patent
Yeah,
numbers,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay, for vaccines,
Yeah.
and like, this patent number has 666 in it. Oh my God. And then I remember one day, like when it kind of calmed down, um, I remember sitting down and going, okay. And I told my brother this, like, I'm gonna do a factory reset in this area.
hmm
And I want to sit down and I want to write what I think I know about eschatology.
hmm
And I want to go to these passages that I know are talking about this thing. And I just want to see what it says.
hmm
And so I kind of was reevaluating, like maybe around 2021 ish. And then I eventually kind of made my way out of it. I went from like dispensational to more like post tribulational, but still dispensational.
Yeah.
And then I was so
What was some of the
enamored with this.
what were some of the key dominoes that fell? Because I sort of went through this as well, but on a like, I mean, at this time you're coming out of it, I was first becoming Christian, so I've sort of my journey's been condensed. But for me, there was a couple of dominoes. I'm interested to see what yours were.
I think the biggest one was how the church taught the rapture
Yeah.
and me not really seeing that as
hmm
they explained it.
Yeah.
That was the major, major one.
Yeah.
Other ones that I kind of picked up on as I continued were things like Daniel 9, for example.
Yeah. Daniel 9. Daniel 9.
Yeah. So Daniel 9, there's no mention of a peace treaty. There's
hmm
no mention of a third temple being built. And so those are two things that they kind of rely on. And
Yeah.
when I saw that, I was just kind of like, oh. And so But because I launched into this kind of study, and I still obviously dabble in it, I was buying books from people that I didn't hold views of.
Mm-hmm.
And the book that really helped me get out of it was R.C. Sproul's book, Last Days According to Jesus.
Yeah.
And I didn't know R.C. Sproul's view, so I didn't know what I was getting into. And I was
Yeah,
kind of
right.
excited. And I was reading it, and it was totally different to what I have ever heard. I have never heard of any other end times view other than dispensational, pre-trib, premillennialism.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
When I did eventually hear about like all millennialism, post-millennialism, I didn't know what they taught. I just kind of brushed it off. And so when I started reading R.C. Sproul's book, who was a post-millennialist, I was just kind of like, I've never heard of this before.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout his book, he's actually one of the main resources R.C. Sproul used was James Stewart Russell's book, The Parousia. And I think Russell wasn't a full preterist, but he was pretty darn close to it. It was pretty much like, I think the only thing Russell really looked to was a final resurrection day. Like,
Yeah.
that was it,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And so Sproul was like using that book before, and it was just kind of like from there I found Jeff Durbin, Apologia. He spent a whole year in Matthew 24.
Yeah.
And that kind of launched me into post-millennialism, because on the way to work and on the way back to work, I would just listen
Mm-hmm.
to Jeff Durbin preach about post-millennialism and breaking down things that, like, this is what is symbolic, and this is from the Old Testament, and Jesus is quoting Daniel here, and it just opened my eyes.
Yeah.
And it clicked. It clicked. I
Yeah.
was like, oh my gosh. And Vodi Bakum was another resource.
Yeah.
He's on millennialism.
Yeah.
And so he was kind of like, I forget how he framed it. It was kind of like, he's not an idealist, where it just kind of like life kind of perpetually
Yeah.
looks like revelation in a sense. But he was very much like one of the earlier resources that I had too when I was coming out of dispensationalism.
Yeah.
But Apologia with Jeff Durbin was like, that drove me to postmillennialism, because he did such a great job kind of going through Matthew 24 so intricately. And each sermon is like an hour long.
Yeah.
So, and then I was so convinced that postmillennialism was right.
Yeah.
It just clicked.
Yeah.
And I got to give it to the postmillennialists. Like 95% of what they say is pretty much spot on.
So where's your? So I was similar. Mine was Daniel 9. I remember, and I mean most people would say this, particularly Dispies and futurists, is that Daniel 9 sort of like the linchpin chapter of all eschatology. You know, like you if you work that out. And I remember reading different opinions on it, and there was a footnote, essentially like a footnote saying, you know, of course, there's also Martin Luther, who has an opinion that's not really held by anyone, that Daniel 9:27 was actually fulfilled by the Messiah. And that was what stuck with me. I was like, oh, well, that's sort of crazy. But I was like, hang on, but how could someone possibly say that? And obviously it's someone fairly famous in church history. And then as I started studying that more, the whole thing fell apart. So Daniel 9:27 was the one that caused futurism to fall apart for me. As you then went post-millennial and you said it was 95% there, what was it that caused that to fall apart for you?
When I launched into Twitter, I didn't know what was going to come of it. I didn't intend to be, and I'm still not by any means, an influencer.
Yeah.
I don't consider myself that.
Yeah.
It was just kind of like a social media thing. I wanted to talk about Christianity and things like that. And so when I started engaging with other people, you know, it was a few instances where, like, I think folks like yourself and a couple others that you and I always kind of engage with,
Yeah.
where like you would agree with me, but then you would have your comments of
Mhm.
like, what? And when I was at one day, actually, this is funny. One day I started a private direct message with two of those guys. And I was like, look, I disagree with you guys. Like, you're full preterist and I'm post millennial.
Mhm.
But you guys are very well versed and you guys seem to know what you're talking about. So I would ask them questions,
Yeah.
not to debate them,
Yeah.
because
To
they
better
seem like a
understand
really
their position.
great
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's what's lacking. So many people are ready to clash. They're not
Yeah.
really ready to talk.
Yeah.
And I was like that too.
Mm.
And it's hard when it's eschatology to debate eschatology.
Yeah.
It's really hard because it's two different languages sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, as a full preterist, how do you debate a premillennialist?
Yeah.
I wouldn't even know where to begin.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Hermeneutic's totally different.
Yep.
Now, you can debate within full preterism
Mm-hmm.
the nature of the resurrection.
Yeah.
Or if you're post-millennial, you might be able to debate an on-millennial guy because it's so close.
Yeah.
But it's one of those discussions where you just have to kind of talk it. Twitter's not the best place for
No,
that.
it's terrible for it. I often say it to our mutual friend Parousia70 that, like, I'll send him a message and you see like these like full dispies on X, and then you say something and I know that the things I say are like Chinese language to them. They have no idea. Yeah, and it's so far apart. So you're never going to solve these differences in opinion there. The only way you actually get it is through, I try to do it. I'm doing this at the moment with Catholicism, as you and I have discussed a little bit. I'm trying to really deeply understand the perspective that disagrees with me. I'm trying to work out what do they see that I don't, and how do they see that. And I think unless you engage in a conversation from that perspective, it never gets anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In every conversation.
No, I was just going to say, like, if they're wrong, I want to know they're wrong by hearing their best possible argument. I don't want to. I'm not getting anywhere by straw man arguments and just defeating what I think I understand, but I don't actually understand.
Yeah. And I'm trying to watch myself even within this topic. It's kind of like I'll throw a comment here and there, but like I'm trying so hard, and I don't know if any of my followers see it, to not be so pushy on the subject on people who obviously aren't like even post millennial. Or I try to limit the discussion mainly to like post millennialists,
Yeah.
because they're just so close.
Yeah.
So Heresy is one of the actual accounts in the DMs that I was talking to.
Yeah.
And so I was asking them questions, and I would show them like Bible verses that I thought, proved them wrong, but then they were whipping out Old Testament stuff. Like,
Yeah.
that's another thing, is my ignorance at the time of Old Testament stuff. And so I guess what got me out of post-millennialism, to answer your question, is I started seeing inconsistencies.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that post-millennialists refuse to see them, but it's very much like me. As hard as I went into this topic, which is almost like 5 years at this point, it's not like I woke up and was like, I declare myself full preterist. Like, I did the work. I bought the books. I bought books I didn't agree with,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like an insult on my intelligence, in a sense of like someone just writes you off. It's frustrating.
Yeah.
And so I just saw certain inconsistencies. And one day I was just kind of like, this is where I'm at, And there's things I'm not like able to elaborately explain still.
Yeah.
It's hard
Yeah.
because we're so limited with what we have as far as like, in the Bible.
Yeah.
Every book of the New Testament has an eschatological reference in it. Every single one.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that really made me love this topic. I was like, man, everything in the New Testament, at least once, right? Obviously, there's more than that, but every single book has eschatology in it.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
And that shapes your worldview. I don't care what anybody says. Your eschatology most definitely shapes your worldview.
Yeah.
And you'll either be nihilistic or you'll search it out.
Yeah. Yes.
Ultimately.
I read during the week, and I put up a tweet about this. that I found, I haven't spent a lot of time in the early church. It's sort of just not really where I've studied, but I'm starting to look there a little bit more. And I agree with you. All these epistles in the New Testament, it's all like about this sort of imminent eschatological event that's coming. And then I read Clement's letter to the Corinthians, and you're like, the couple of things that struck me, it's like that the imminent event that seemed apparent in all these epistles had disappeared. It was a really different tone. Like, it wasn't dealing with most of the epistles are dealing with the imminent eschatological event and Judaizers. There's no mention of Judaizers. There's no mention of falling back to the old ways. The tone is really, really different. And so people often say, well, why do none of the church fathers teach full preterism, or why do none of them mention it? Thinking about that, it's like, well, there's clearly a shift. There's a shift in, now, I'm not sure Clement at that point in time needed to mention, and Clement probably didn't have all his theology worked out. Like, I'm not sure any of the apostles ever had their whole theology worked out. Like, I'm not sure whether theology is ever something that's meant to be perfectly worked out. We have scriptures which are a record of events that were recorded often to give very specific details to very specific groups of people as well. Like Daniel was written to an audience that were 500 years before Christ, and then the first century. Like, it's like we're not the audience of that letter. So it's like when you read Clement, to me, it shows that it's like they might not have worked everything out, but they were in a new mode. Like, they were starting to do something different. They had a new focus, and this imminent event that was there was no longer their focus.
I have an inverse version of that. I've never read Clement. I want to get some of his stuff because I have a fascination with history.
Yeah.
But I recently read Polycarp's epistle to the Philippians, and he very much he doesn't lay out an eschatology view, but he very much held to a hell as we kind of see it today. And he did believe in a return, a physical return, and he did believe in a event of corpses, resurrection.
Yeah.
He did. And he was born in AD 69.
Yeah.
So a year before the whole Jerusalem siege.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because according to like tradition and things like that, he was the Apostle John's kind of student, or one of his students or disciple. And for me, it's kind of like, as a preterist, I'm just like, okay, the guy who wrote Revelation is supposedly your teacher, and you hold to these views. And that's the part where you just kind of go, okay, well, but what does the Bible say?
Yeah.
Is it possible for Polycarp to be wrong, even though he was a student? I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, there was people sitting within Paul's audience who, like Hymenaeus and Philetus, they were teaching off the wall stuff, and they were around the disciples.
Well, I think another good example is Mary and Martha, where their brother Lazarus, who just died, and they're like, yes, we understand at the last day, you'll raise him up. And Jesus is like, yeah, that's not entirely it. That's not exactly how it works. Like, they're his closest confidants here on earth. And they didn't understand their eschatology or theology. That, and I think that, Peter, his right-hand man through the whole period. So, like, it's not until 1st and 2nd Peter, written, 10 decades later, that the guy starts to have some really strong theology.
Yeah. And the Mary and Martha example is a good one, actually, because when they say we know that he'll raise on the last day, they're going back to Daniel.
Yeah.
Daniel 12.
Yeah.
That's what they're going back to.
Yeah.
And we love Daniel 12, because the tribulation and the resurrection happened
one after the other.
Generation,
Yeah.
to Daniel.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, okay, Polycarp believed this, Irenaeus believed this, but this is what the Bible says.
Yeah. The other thing sorry, keep going.
And I was just saying, I think people are uncomfortable with that.
Yeah. So
We're very much sola scriptura,
yeah,
but not really.
no, no one is. It doesn't hold.
No. Reform did reforming.
Yeah. But
No.
but let's cut out the reforming and let's say what was reformed at X point in time 500 years ago is the gold standard.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So where I'm at now is I don't think sola scriptura holds, and I don't think anyone actually holds it. At least Catholics are honest and say that they don't. But whereas like a lot of Protestants and Reform guys say that they do, but none of them actually do. I was discussing this with my most recent guest, Greg Shakon, and he was saying he's prima scriptura, that the Bible never intended to be a document that covered everything. It's a historical narrative of corporate Israel, really, and events that would happen and then events that did happen, which means that there's a whole lot of stuff that isn't covered. And I would say that, I mean, most full preterists would say this, that it's not really talking about anything that's going on today, which means that either we've been left with a void, we've been given this 66 or 72, 73 book canon, if the Catholics are right, that talk about all these events, and then the events finish and it's like, off you go. There's nothing more for you. So it's like, I'm toying with the idea, like, could we be completely right on our reading of the scriptures telling a full preterist story, but there's yet future things to happen here on earth that just the Bible doesn't cover because it didn't need to cover? I was doing an interesting study on the verses. What is it? Might be Luke 12, maybe, where Jesus is talking about, the stewards that he leaves, and then he'll the one that goes and does good works, but be careful the one that doesn't, because he'll come back when it's not expected, and he'll send them off with the unbelievers. And you read that and you're like he clearly says, like, he'll come back when it's not expected to the individual, right? Which means, like, I don't know, like, is there this idea that, and some people talk about this, like the parousia, the presence, that there is like an ongoing element of it, that it's
I've heard of that.
maybe the coming that is the parousia, the event that is spoken of in the New Testament is the 70 AD coming. But who's to say that maybe the individual death of a human is where there is another coming, where there's a judgment and there's a separation
Yeah.
of the wheat and chaff? Like, I don't know. I'm just trying to think a little bit more out of the box to answer these questions, because you see this in preterism. I mean, there's a whole individual body or corporate body debate. No one can agree on what happens when you die now. They've got absolutely no idea. No one can agree on what the scripture says happens after death. A lot of preterists will say it doesn't cover it.
And it kind of doesn't.
No, I don't think it does either.
I mean, we get a few things, sort of like when the Sadducees questioned Jesus on the resurrection, and Jesus goes, "You don't know what the scriptures teach or the power of God, apparently, because you're rejecting this.
Yeah.
There's be no marriage, and you'd be like the angels in heaven."
Yeah.
I think that's a reference to the afterlife, but it's not detailed.
No.
We just know that we'll be like the angels in heaven, which I think is a reference to Daniel, where you shine brightly as the stars or whatever. And then we get a parable about a rich man and Lazarus, but again, that's a parable.
It's a parable, yeah.
And it's a parable, and it's not even talking about the afterlife in the sense of heaven, as opposed to what we would say is hell. Like, the parable is actually Hades.
Yeah.
The realm of the dead. It's not even like Hades is still there. It's not even destroyed yet.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't really count. That was more for their generation. And even when Jesus talks about, like, being thrown into hell where the worm dieth not, I have very problematic, I have issues with the way that was translated, because I think that was more of a judgment kind of symbolic language.
Yeah.
I think it was literal in the sense that it happened in Jerusalem. But I don't think Jesus is referencing a literal eternal conscious torment reality in
No.
referencing that.
Yeah.
And so for me as a full preterist, it is one of those things you have to kind of wrestle with amongst the post millennialists and or even with fellow preterists. And where I've kind of landed is I believe the resurrection was pointing to a very specific redemption centered event that did happen, that was necessary to happen.
Yeah.
But also, I think when our time is up here on earth, individually, I do think that we are resurrected in the sense that I believe we go to God and He does judge us individually.
Yeah.
And you're either entering to His presence for eternity
Mm-hmm.
or you don't. And I know there's, the annihilation view. I don't know where I land on that. Right now, I would say, if I had to choose, I would say that I believe in an eternal separation from God
Yeah.
that would kind of be a form of punishment, I guess.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's meant to convey like God torturing you with fire. I think when you look at the Ezekiel 37 and, you see the valley of dry bones,
Mm.
and Ezekiel's looking out and he sees the bones. They're in exile. They're out of God's presence.
Mm.
That's why they're pictured as that. They're dead.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because it says that they are without hope.
Yeah.
And I think that could be kind of like a picture of maybe that's what it is like. Maybe being outside of God's presence for eternity is just kind of like this, just hopelessness.
Yeah.
There's no hope for eternal life for them anymore. They
Yeah.
squandered it.
Yeah.
And so that's just something I thought about recently.
Mm.
But that's kind of where I land as far as the afterlife. I don't know. I don't pretend to know.
Yeah.
I used to pretend that I did know
Yeah.
until Steve Magwa did a series on hell.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've seen that or not.
I've spoken to
worth
Steve, and
watching.
I'm pretty familiar with Steve's position, and I hold to a similar one. And that's I'm sort of now okay with that because I'm like, if the scriptures are what they are, then it's given to us not to give us knowledge of every single thing from creation of the world to the end of the world and everything that happens in between, but to lay down the covenant and how we are to live here. I think it's a given that there's life after death. I don't think you possibly, as the Sadducees say, argue that there is none. But what if the scriptures are just not interested in explaining that to us because it's not the purpose of them? Which
I agree. I think the purpose of the Bible and its narrative from Genesis to Revelation is, in one sentence, it is about Israel's redemption.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know, like a lot of the covenant theology, people go, "Oh, the church is Israel," and there's no nuance there. Like the story is about ethnic Israel.
100%. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Now, how we view Israel in the New Testament as opposed to the Old, that conversation can be had. But even in the New Testament, it was still ethnic Israel centered.
Yeah.
I don't like going around and calling myself like, "Oh, we're all spiritual Jews." I don't hold that view of like
And neither do I.
theology view.
No.
Because like if there's no Jew or Greek in Christ, then why are you calling yourself a spiritual Jew?
Yeah. Yeah.
That contradicts itself.
Yeah.
I get what they mean, but they don't nuance it. They just slap a Twitter post.
Yeah. Agree.
Church is Israel. And it's like there's no nuance, and it confuses people.
Yeah.
And so that's where I kind of fall in this interesting thing of like the dispensationalists. When it comes to the Israel importance,
They get it
right.
They get it right. Yeah.
It's like they're like 2,000 years late, but they get that part right.
And they're consistent.
And
they're far more consistent than the post-millennial guys.
They're so consistent, they're willing to go back to the shadows.
Yeah.
They're ready for red heifers, man.
Yeah.
And then for the covenant theology folks, I find it hard to lean 100% into there because they get a lot of things right in the spiritual sense, but they downplay the importance of ethnic Israel.
Yeah.
And the difference is the eschaton.
Yeah. I've had some fascinating debates with, like these reform guys about Israel, and they'll like dump on me. I'm like, man, I'm on the same page as you. I'm the most like anti-19 Israel guy you'll find. Like they have no biblical significance whatsoever, but you can't get so emotional and caught up with that you say none of the Bible's about Israel. Like it's all about Israel. You just, it's not about
Exactly.
the modern Israel. And I agree with you on that.
And that was a big thing for me coming into preterism too, is anytime someone goes into preterism is there's unraveling you have to,
Yeah.
because you're so caught up with all these other things you've been told or thought you knew.
Yeah.
And it's always cool. It's always cool when I get a little notification on my phone and it's from like an Amil guy or a post mill guy in my messages. And I'm just like, hey, tell me more.
Yeah.
And it's very rare. It does happen, but it's very rare. And it's just kind of like you're teachable.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not a pastor and
Yeah.
I'm not a teacher. I never went to seminary. Everything that I post on Twitter is stuff that I've kind of learned through my own study. So I don't parade myself as some sort of authority, but it's kind of cool when someone trusts you enough to say, hey, I see what you post. Can you kind of elaborate and help me understand? I enjoy those conversations because even if they ultimately disagree,
Yeah.
and there's a few that do, like we build a relationship.
100%. Yeah. I don't need everyone to agree with me. I change my mind all the time. Most of the positions I hold are probably going to prove to be wrong, but I hope I go about it the right way.
Yeah.
So I want to shift now to get you to help me with my challenges that I'm working through, which sort of ties in with that Israel point. So we've spoken about what we see the biblical narrative as being, and that it is Israel centric, and these Israel only guys go off the end of the cliff with it, and it's a mythological story about Israel, has no significance for now. Like I just think that's so incorrect, because I think from beginning to end, Israel was the means to the end with a purpose. It was never the end itself. And the purpose, I think, from Adam onwards was that God's covenant people would bring goodness to the earth. They'll hear, it was never, the narrative is never about some ticket out of this place to go somewhere else. It is so people could be here, they could be the priests and the kings, they could bring healing to the nations. So the Israel only idea makes no sense, that cool, this whole thing has been achieved and now it's just done. It's like, well, now it's achieved and now it can actually go to work. So, and I land in the sort of full preterist is sort of split in two, with some being sort of individual body view, some being corporate. I see it as a corporate story. I think it's a corporate body.
I do too.
The biggest argument against preterism, and if I'm being intellectually honest, this is not solved for me, is that if we see this great and this is, I think, where it comes, people don't frame this argument the right way, but I think this sort of intrinsically is maybe what's driving people's criticism, is that you say, hey, everything was achieved at 70 AD and this new covenant body was created. Look, you can see it all in the scriptures. And then people will say, yeah, and then what? What about this like void? And I would argue against that by saying, hey, like people in every nation on earth for 2,000 years have become believers, come into the new covenant community, and all through all these denominations, which are, I would have said is a feature, not a bug, mean that, you're getting emotional Jesus freaks that are coming through the charismatic movement. You're getting conservative guys through reform movement. That all these people are coming into the covenant. My issue to this point is the complete lack of cohesion as a corporate body. Now, I can make those points all I wish, but Israel was arguably in a better position 2,000 years ago as a corporate body than we are now. We have the average Christian has no semblance of a corporate body. There's 40,000 odd denominations, even in the full preterists. And these guys are smart, intellectual guys. They understand their scripture. The Facebook groups in preterism are a disaster. Like, it's just preterists arguing against each other on doctrine. And I'm like, Like even like they're all arguing like individual body versus corporate body, and even the corporate body guys like aren't getting together as one corporate body to go, and maybe they're getting together to do debates, but like they're not building hospitals, they're not building schools, they're not doing all this stuff. So I had on the show Mesh Mesher, and then I had Sean McMahon come on, who are both full preterists that have become Catholic as a result of their preterism, which was a shocking thing to hear for me. I was like, what? I'm like, because I've always thought Catholics are just Christians that don't read their Bibles, and are fooled by Rome. And so
Yeah.
I've spoken to these two smart people that became Catholic. I'm like, hang on. I'm like, how are you Catholic? And rather than dismissing them, I've been like, hang on, what are they seeing that I've missed? So I've been going back to the drawing board and really looking again at Catholicism, because if Catholicism is true, it solves this void. Like if it is the true church, then at 70 AD, New Covenant creation became the new thing. It took over Old Covenant Israel, and within 200 years, it's toppled the Roman Empire. And then for a good 1200 years after that, it becomes basically the dominant power in global geopolitics, establishes itself in every single corner of the earth. Even the last up until the mid 1900s, still like really the dominant sort of institution around the world. And it's only really probably in our lifetimes entered this period of losing its dominance. But I mean, there's still 1 billion plus Catholics around the world. There's still, said this to you, there's still Catholic churches on prime real estate in every city on earth. There's Catholic schools everywhere. There's Catholic hospitals. And I think Francis is a bad pope. But a lot of Catholics will say, you can have bad popes. It doesn't change the validity of the office. So I am, much to my complete dismay, re-questioning whether I'm wrong on Catholicism. Where are you at on that question?
Man.
And can you see where I'm coming from?
Yeah. And you mentioned the Israel only folks. And I messaged you when I found out about the Israel only position. I think I messaged you and I was
Yeah, I
like,
think you
man,
did.
like I'm a little worried here. Because
Bleak.
it's strange.
Yeah.
Like they're so like they're full preterist enough to make all the same arguments and the same hermeneutic. And the only difference is like, yeah, it just becomes agnosticism. To me, that's the hyper preterism. People
Yeah.
always conflate full preterism with hyper preterism. And it's like saying, you know, you're a Mormon when you're a Christian. It's like, because what? Because both have a Jesus. And it's like, it's not the same thing. And it is depressing. And but you shared the Tim Martin video
Mm.
with me,
The promised land of
and
Lot.
I saw, yeah, and I was like, man, this guy's incredible. And it kind of got me out of that funk and kind of reignited me a bit, because that's the danger of Israel only, is they're so good at sounding like
Yeah.
a preterist.
Yeah.
They never discuss the other verses that talk about the church continuing. They never talk about the verses like in Isaiah 66, where after the judgment inside the new heavens and new earth, like there are people who've never heard of God. And Isaiah 66 says these survivors of this judgment teach the nations about this God.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because when you look at the last verse in Isaiah 66, it says, and they view the dead bodies where the worm dieth not. That's Gehenna.
Yeah.
And so like that's an eschatological passage.
Yeah.
So there's people who haven't heard about God in the new heavens and new earth, and Gehenna's there. And it's like, okay, we've got everything kind of backwards in that sense. And so, but you never see the Israel only folks talk about that.
No.
Or like passages in Isaiah that talk about, the new covenant being eternal, and things like that. And so it is very depressing, Israel only. As far as like the Catholicism thing, it is an interesting point because I like you said, I'm trying to be more gracious with them too. Like it used to be, and you see it all over social media, these accounts that just pull out these straw man arguments. And
Yeah.
not everyone who sits in a Catholic mass, I don't think they even know all the intricate dogmas of Rome and all
Mm.
the Vatican I, Vatican II, you know,
Yeah,
and all this intricate stuff. I think you could be a genuine Christian and be a Catholic,
100%.
just like you could be a Protestant and probably be not a Christian. And no one ever thinks about it like that.
Mm.
And so I think like you made an interesting point yesterday. I have never thought of. You were like when you had that old covenant economy with the high priest and the Pharisees, and they sat in the seat of Moses, and Jesus says, "Submit to them, but don't do as they do."
Mm.
And you're like, that could be applied to Catholicism.
Yeah,
Just because you're a part of the Roman Catholic Church doesn't mean you have to like do as they do.
yeah.
You don't have to like kiss Mary statues or kiss icons. But I think you could be a genuine Christian and acknowledge that,
Mm.
reject that, and still probably go to Catholic Mass. You know,
Yeah.
I think that's totally possible.
Yeah, I was having this discussion with, a friend recently and saying that, like, you gotta judge the office, not the individuals in it. And I mean, that's a story from if you're not getting that story from the whole Old Testament and New Testament, like, you're missing a big part there in that, like, just because Israel had bad kings didn't mean you could throw out the kingdom of Israel. Like the loyal Israelite through those periods would be like, yeah, this is a bad king, but this is still my God, and this is still an office that I need to treat with
Yeah.
respect and pray for and submit to, because an imperfect corporate body is still better than no corporate body. And that's
Yeah.
and then even if the claim that Peter's the first pope is true, the lesson from that is that the first pope was a pretty imperfect guy. Like, after he had been given his title, he goes and denies Jesus 3 times at the cross. You're like,
They
well,
become, yeah, he's a hypocrite. He's eating with Gentiles, and the Jews show up, and he's not.
yeah,
And it's,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and so it's a topic that I've never delved into, although I've thought about it, but I've not to your extent where you're like really looking into it. Maybe I should.
Mm,
But there is an apparent lack of structure that seems similar to what they have,
mm,
meaning the apostolic church in the first
yeah.
century
Very
versus like,
hierarchical. Bishops in these cities writing to each other,
yeah,
like, yeah,
and they took it seriously.
yep,
Like when you read Ignatius
yep,
and you see what he says, where it's like you don't do anything outside the bishop's eyes. If you
mm,
do, that's like sinful.
yep,
They took it seriously, and they
yep,
had these established offices. And then it's weird. It's like you look into the Protestant churches, and you have like a board of elders, but
yeah,
it's like Joe the plumber and Matt the tax guy,
yep,
and like none of them really know their position.
yeah,
They're not people who are engaged with the body, teaching them, shielding them from falsehoods.
yep. That's what I say. The more I'm looking into this, I'm like, all these like Protestant denominations, they're Catholic light or they're counterfeit Catholic. Like they try to
Oh, yeah.
establish. That's
I
me
won't.
being controversial and brash with the comment, but it's like you're still setting up a deacon, you're still setting up a group of elders. Like, at least the Catholics are going all in on it.
I won't mention the name of the church, obviously, because I served there for so many years. But I was transitioning out of that church, and there was a group transitioning out too. We felt like the leadership was lacking, and the theology was lacking, and so we had these meetings, and someone took up the point of like, who are the elders? Like, no one knows who the elders are at this church. And the response was, well, it's on the website, and you can kind of see,
Mm,
the little bio in the picture, or whatever. And it's like these are supposed to be like the pillars of the church,
yeah,
and it shocked me that the pastor's response was like, Yeah, but these guys are like plumbers and electricians in their full-time jobs. Their concern isn't the church really.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I was like, in my head, I was like, what do you mean? Their
Yeah,
concern isn't the church as a priority for this office. Like, they're supposed to know us.
yeah,
They're supposed to teach us and guide us and protect us. And they don't. They just have the position just because the pastor was like, okay, you're an elder.
yeah.
And it is cheap. That's cheap.
Mm,
And uh, and then you look at like Roman Catholicism and you look at Orthodoxy even. And I know you don't really get into the Orthodoxy thing, but man, they have such a structured hierarchy within their churches and they are consistent. They have doctrines that they hold to as a corporate body.
mm,
There's really no deviation.
yeah.
I mean, there are some, but it's not like us where it's like, yeah, Presbyterians and Baptists fighting over child infant like baptisms and stuff.
Well, I mean, that's
You
like
know,
a
like
that's like a key thing is, and I see Catholics make this argument. I'm like, hey, you're making a good point. They're like, if it's sola scriptura and it's, each their own interpretations, like, you guys can't even agree on what you need to do to become a Christian. You can't agree on whether you have your salvation or not, who can have their salvation. Like these aren't secondary doctrines. These are core doctrines, and there isn't agreement. So
I think.
no,
Go
you
ahead.
go.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, like, as a
I heard.
preterist, I find myself making bad excuses for how that's the case.
Yeah, I heard an interesting debate with Jay Dyer, and I know you're like got your thoughts on him, and he's kind of wacky. He's funny though. I gotta admit, he's a funny
Yeah, yeah,
guy.
yeah, yeah,
But he's an Orthodox guy, and he's super smart. Like he's really smart,
yeah. He knows his stuff.
and he debates people on sola scriptura, and I gotta say, dude, he puts them to shame.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, he just
yeah,
does.
yeah,
And one of the linchpin arguments he pulls out is how do you hold to sola scriptura when the Bible doesn't even list the canon of
yeah,
books that you guys follow?
yeah,
Like you guys kind of relied on us in church history to do that,
yeah,
you know? And then it just kind of goes on from there because his live streams are like 2 hours long. But that was one
yeah,
of the main things. And I was just kind of like, how do you even answer that?
yeah. I don't think you can
Like it's
argue it.
true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, that's another thing about preterism too that kind of is shaping my views a little bit. And I mentioned it in our conversation last night where I was talking to my brother and I was kind of like, man, I feel like I'm a little bit less reformed these days
mm,
because of my, you know, recent views on things. And it's just kind of weird. Like, I'm not like, I would call myself a Calvinist, but I'm not Calvinist as the Reformed folks would probably
yeah,
see
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah,
Like when I see like predestination and the elect in the biblical narrative, I do think it's talking about Israel, and I
yeah.
do think it's talking about the Gentiles who were elected for that specific time period.
Point in time. Yeah, I'm the same.
I don't think it's necessarily talking about generations and generations of like predestination elect. And I guess you can make the argument God works the same way.
Mm,
And since he is omniscient and all knowing and beginning from the end, and we affirm all that, I guess in some sense, I guess you could say or make an argument for that. But I think in terms of honoring the narrative and the context, I think it was largely talking about Israel and the Gentiles
yeah.
at that time period.
In their specific fulfillment of prophecy, in which
Yes.
you needed people to. I mean, if you put yourself in God's shoes, which is always a silly thing to do, but in fulfilling these prophecies, you needed people to move a certain way. You needed to place people where they need to be. You couldn't.
And I think, and I'll even go a step further, and I don't know where you land on this. When it comes to the Gentiles or the nations, I think a lot of that has to do with restoring the northern
Yeah,
tribes
yeah,
back.
yeah,
And people don't see that at all because they're
yeah,
like, no, Gentiles means Mike down the street,
yeah, yeah,
you know? But no, like Gentiles was just a common phraseology for the nations.
yeah. I think Romans is dealing mainly with the tribes.
I do too,
Yeah.
because whenever Paul is quoting from the Old Testament to the Gentiles, it's focused on northern Israel.
Yeah.
And that's my frustration with the modern church these days is if you go up to, I don't know what church you go to, uh, but if you were to go one Sunday, is it dispensational? I don't remember if you said.
No, I go to like a Presbyterian church.
Go to a Presbyterian. If you were to go to your Presbyterian church and you pull someone aside, I'm not saying do this, and you just say, explain to me what happened in the division of the kingdom of Israel and the prophecies of their restoration. Can you elaborate on that for me?
I would know what
And
you're
in
talking
some
about.
cases, I've had people who have been in the faith longer than me, and they go, "Well, I didn't know that was ever divided."
Mm. Yeah.
And so it was just kind of like, okay, this is where some of the disconnect may be coming from. And so when you say, well, Romans 9 Gentiles is talking about the scattered tribe of 10 tribes of Israel, that's again, it's like speaking Chinese to them.
Yeah.
They don't grasp it.
Yeah. But then
But that's
the Israel only guys then make the mistake and say, hey, all the Gentiles is always talking about the tribe. You're like, well, who were the nations that Abraham was going to bless?
yeah, exactly. And so it's this weird thing. I think the Great Commission was specifically to have that restoration come into fruition
Yeah.
because it was the gospel of the kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And the scattered tribes had to be restored back to Judah. That's the prodigal son.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you break it down.
Yeah.
And a lot of people think that's about the feel-good story of we all backslid and we can go back to God. And I make the argument, no, the prodigal son is actually about Israel's restoration.
I made that same argument. I made that same argument this week to a mutual friend of ours who takes the feel-good individual story about saying,
yeah,
we can't lose our salvation. We always come back. I'm like, it's a corporate parable. I think I love the story. I love trying to put ourselves in it as an individual. It makes us feel good, but I don't think that's the point of it. Yeah, exactly.
They expected it. Peter's I think it was Peter's first question in Acts is, Lord, when's the restoration happening? They expected it.
Yeah.
It's not 1948.
Yeah.
And that's the cool thing about preterism is, man, it really makes the Bible like the best story. It's the most like intricate, like best story ever written.
Yeah.
Like it really is.
Yeah. What's the main thing there's probably a few that you've touched on, but stuff you're really grappling with at the moment. And then further to that, what do you think what do you have the humility to say you might be wrong on?
One of the things that I'm grappling on is, I would say, like you said, the disunity within the body is something my dad and I talk about a lot. Again, I've never did the full deep dive that you're doing, but it is something that I do think about here and there because it is very fragmented.
Yeah.
Also, just kind of being okay with undoing certain things. Like if full preterism leads me out of like the Calvinistic long beard reformed guy smoking cigar tradition, like, am I okay with that?
Yeah.
And so like when you start kind of unwinding some of the things that you held to for so long, it feels like you are doing away with a piece of you, because like you've been a part of these things for so long, and then you kind of peel it back, and it's like I told you last night, it feels like you're walking away from the faith, but you're not. I actually feel stronger.
Yeah.
Because like Calvinism, for example, they don't address an eschatological framework. It's all soteriology, but soteriology is intermixed with eschatology because redemption is the theme.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a biblical outlook on redemption, you don't have a biblical soteriology.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to what we were saying last night about the atonement. Who's under the curse of the law? If Jesus was born under the law to redeem those under the law, we were never under the Mosaic covenant.
Yeah.
So what does redemption biblically look like And how can we apply that to our lives post 70? What does it look like to be born again?
Mm.
If no,
You weren't
and
born
this
under
is
the law.
controversial too. Yeah, and this is controversial because we often tell people you must be born again, but
Yeah.
the people that needed to be born again, they were born in Adam,
Mm.
and they're being born again into Christ.
Yeah.
That's that's what it is.
Yeah.
But what does that look like for us?
Mm.
And I'm not saying that that's where Israel only they creep in, and that's where you got to be careful because I don't think there's nothing,
Yeah.
obviously,
Yeah.
but there has to be a good biblical adult way to talk about these things without being slapped with like heretic, you're damnable. And so, like, when you start peeling back to traditions, it's kind of like it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it's something I struggle with when I'm still going to a church that embraces some of these things and it's the normative belief system.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like I'm the odd one out.
Yeah. Oh, it's been a
So,
good, great theology chat. I've enjoyed breaking it down. I think this is probably going to be an episode. I know you're like a real go-to person for a lot of guys I speak to, and everyone's like, "Oh, Chris is just such a good dude," and they love asking you questions because you got a really nice mannerism in terms of the way you do go about it. So I think a lot of people are going to enjoy just listening to us just hashing it out over theology here. But maybe just to finish up, we'll go away from that and just get a bit more on your personal situation. So you're father of Thomas. You followed my lead and went with the best boy's name that there is. Well done on that. Wait, is he
it's
12 weeks
super
old now?
strong. He's almost going to be 5 months.
Yeah.
So he's growing up quick, man. He's practically in college.
You enjoying it?
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing. It's one of those things where you knew it was going to be, everyone knows it's going to be tough. You're
Yeah.
raising another person. And there are some tough things about it for sure, but it's so rewarding.
Yeah.
You know, when you come home from work and it's like he smiles because he hasn't seen you all day.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's super cool. And I guess that's kind of we can go full circle again because I feel like we talk about so many things.
Mm.
I just want your audience to leave this episode knowing like this all can be put together. I
Mm.
didn't want it to be I didn't want to sound disjointed or anything because I love to talk about these things. But when we talk about like our worldview, if you have a biblical view on redemption and the eschaton and God's kingdom, that is the point of life is like spreading that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Jesus means by the meek will inherit the earth.
Yeah.
I think our purpose, like you said, is to we honor God, we love God with all of our soul and being. We love our fellow man. We raise our kids up in God's ways. And I think
Mm.
God blesses that.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying you're automatically a Christian because you grew up in a Christian home, but I do think God blesses children in a Christian home where it's kind of like it's easier to believe. And I think that's a blessing.
Yeah.
And when you raise your kids up in God's ways, morals and statutes, and kind of take over the earth in the most peaceful,
Yeah.
you know, non-combative way. And I think that's kind of the point. It's like the gospel
Yeah.
does fill the nation. And those who are like, Revelation 22 says, those people who are willing, they can drink freely from the river of life
Yeah.
and they can come in. The
Yeah.
gates are always open.
100%.
Revelation says the gates are always open.
Mm.
But it's interesting that there are people who can't come in to these gates because they're stuck in their sin.
Mm.
And and so as we preach the gospel, even though the commission I think was to restore Israel into one body in the new covenant kingdom, New Jerusalem, um, man, I think that the Great Commission continues to happen.
Yeah.
It's kind of like fulfilled doesn't mean you fully stop. Like it's not a full stop. Um, and that's what we got to do. We got to beat our swords into plowshares and take over the world for God's glory, as Steve Nagel would say. Everything's for the glory of God.
Yeah, Greg. I mean, Greg on the most recent episode made such a good point on that. He's like, it's like for him the greatest proof of God's existence is that like worshiping God and living in accordance to His will has positive returns for you. You know, like if it didn't work and you felt miserable as a result, you're like, well, this doesn't really make sense. But you know, and we all know that whether we're believers or non-believers, like we get our greatest joy when we love others. It doesn't really make any sense in an existentialist worldview.
Yeah.
But when we love others, when we do for others, and when we, you know, I think when we gain dominion in the right way, in the good way, like these are positive outcomes. It should lead to a more fulfilled life. And life outside of it should feel lacking fulfillment. And you see evidence of that. I mean, we've got more than enough evidence of people living an unfulfilled life.
And that scares people in the sense of, a lot of the people in the other kind of systems, they'll say, so you don't believe in this reset, glorified earth where, you're riding glorified animals and surfing the glorified tides of Australia. And it's
No, there's no more
like,
sea. There's no more sea though, so they can't be surfing.
That's not, it's like, that's not even the point. It's, I think, again, like you said, there's so many positive returns, and I don't think the Bible ever addresses the end of space-time continuum as we know it.
No.
But I think the earth can actually be transformed, like people are transformed when the gospel hits.
Yeah.
Because when the gospel brings people to life and people live that way, it infiltrates.
Yeah.
It infiltrates their businesses. It infiltrates politics, and of course, people can mess it up. But I think there's a larger good, like you said, and that's what we should be striving for. Not this fake Christian nationalism where you force it, like the pagan must have blasphemy laws.
Yeah.
And it's like that's never going to work.
Yeah.
That was never the apostles' intentions. The apostles actually submitted to their government.
Yeah.
And so our goal is to take over the world with the peacefulness of the gospel, because it's ultimately God who does the quickening, and that's part of the reformed aspect I still hold on to.
Yeah.
Is,
Yeah.
it's God ultimately transforming, through His people.
Amen to that. Well, Chris, thanks so much for your time, mate. I'll let you go and sit on the couch for, I don't know, what is it? We started 7 o'clock. Was that
around 7?
8:30. If you're anything like me, you'll have about 15 minutes on the couch and then bedtime now.
It's almost 9 p.m. I don't know. I go to bed pretty early, so you're probably right.
I'll take care and all the best. We'll chat soon.
All right. Thanks, Luke. It was awesome.
Good stuff. Thanks, brother.
No problem.